Harold, a 72-year-old retired carpenter from Ohio, has been eagerly planning a visit to see his two young grandchildren after months of limited contact. When he arrives unannounced at his son Michael's suburban home, expecting the warm family reunion he's been dreaming of, he's met with shocking hostility. His son tells him to stay away from them and refuses to let him see the kids. What unfolds is a painful journey of discovering family secrets, confronting past mistakes, and fighting for a relationship with the grandchildren who mean everything to him. Through heartbreak and determination, Harold must navigate the complex web of family dynamics, his daughter-in-law's hidden resentments, and his own failures as a father to rebuild the bridges he thought were solid. The rental car's engine ticked as it cooled in Michael's driveway, and I sat there for a moment, smoothing down my best button-down shirt. The blue one Sarah always said brought out my eyes. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the bag of presents in the passenger seat. Inside were a wooden toy train I'd carved for 8-year-old Tommy and a dollhouse I'd spent weeks building for little Emma, who'd just turned 6. I'd been planning this visit for 2 months, ever since our last phone call had ended so abruptly. Michael had seemed distracted, distant even, but I'd chalked it up to work stress. He was always carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, just like I used to at his age. The suburban Ohio neighborhood looked peaceful in the late afternoon sun. Manicured lawns, white picket fences, the American dream wrapped up in neat little packages. Walking up that familiar stone pathway, I could hear children's laughter echoing from the backyard. My heart lifted. Tommy and Emma were home. I quickened my pace, already imagining their faces when they saw what Grandpa had brought them. The doorbell's chime seemed to echo longer than usual, and I shifted the gift bag from one hand to the other, checking my reflection in the glass door panel. When the door opened, my smile faltered immediately. Michael stood there, but this wasn't the son I remembered. His face was rigid, his jaw clenched tight, and his eyes looked right through me like I was a stranger. Dad. His voice was flat, emotionless. Not "Hey, Dad," or "What a surprise." Just "Dad." "Michael, son." I held up the gift bag, trying to inject warmth into the moment. "I was in the area and thought I'd surprise you and the kids. I brought them something special. You can't be here." He stepped outside and pulled the door closed behind him, effectively blocking my view of the house's interior. The sound of that door clicking shut felt like a slap. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "What do you mean I can't be here? This is your home and those are my grandchildren. Lower your voice." His whisper was sharp, urgent. He glanced toward the neighbors' houses as if worried someone might overhear. "I told you on the phone last time that things were complicated right now." My mind raced back to our last conversation. It had been brief, yes, and he'd mentioned some issues, but I thought he meant work problems or maybe financial stress. I never imagined this. Complicated how? I set the gift bag down on the porch and took a step closer to him. "Michael, I'm your father. These children are my grandchildren. I drove 3 hours to see them." Something shifted in his expression, a flash of the boy I'd raised, the one who used to run to me when he skinned his knees or had nightmares, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Jessica doesn't want you here," he said finally, the words falling like stones between us. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, the woman I'd walked down the aisle when her own father couldn't be there, the woman I'd helped move into their first apartment, whose hand I'd held in the hospital waiting room when Tommy was born. Why would Jessica? What did I do? My voice cracked despite my efforts to stay composed. "It's not just one thing, Dad, it's..." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood when he was overwhelmed. "It's everything." Everything? The word came out louder than I intended, and he flinched. From inside the house, I heard Emma's voice calling, "Daddy, who's at the door?" My heart clenched. She was so close. Just beyond that door was my little Emma, probably in her favorite pink dress, maybe clutching that stuffed rabbit she carried everywhere. And Tommy, was he working on one of those complicated Lego sets he loved so much? "Can I at least say hello to them?" "5 minutes, Michael, just let me give them their presents and..." No. The finality in his voice was devastating. "Dad, I need you to leave now." I stared at my son, really looked at him. When had he gotten so thin? When had those lines appeared around his eyes? When had he started looking at me like I was the enemy? "I don't understand what's happening here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Last Christmas everything was fine. Emma sat on my lap while I read her stories. Tommy showed me his baseball cards. We were a family. That was different." "Different how?" He glanced at the door again, then back at me. For a moment, I thought he might explain, might bridge whatever chasm had opened between us. Instead, He bent down and picked up my gift bag. "I'll make sure they get these," he said, holding it out like a peace offering that wasn't really peace at all. I didn't take it. "I made those myself, Michael. I carved that train by hand. The dollhouse has working lights and tiny furniture. I wanted to show them how everything works, wanted to see their faces." "I know you did." For the first time, his voice softened slightly. "I know you put a lot of work into them." "Then why?" The front door opened, and Jessica appeared. Even after 15 years of family gatherings, birthdays, and holidays, I barely recognized the woman standing there. Her blonde hair was pulled back severely, and her mouth was set in a hard line. But it was her eyes that shocked me most. They held a coldness I'd never seen before. "Harold," she said, not even pretending at politeness, "Michael told you to leave." "Jessica, please. I just want to see the children for a few minutes. I don't know what I've done to upset you, but whatever it is, we can work it out. We're family." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Family? You think showing up unannounced makes you family? I've been trying to arrange a visit for months. Every time I call, there's an excuse. I thought if I just came by..." "You thought wrong." She stepped closer to Michael, presenting a united front. "Those children don't need the kind of confusion you bring into their lives." "Confusion? I'm their grandfather. I love them." "Love?" Her voice rose. "You call what you've done love?" I looked between my son and daughter-in-law, feeling like I'd stumbled into a conversation that had been going on without me for months, maybe years. "What have I done? Please, just tell me what I've done wrong." Jessica and Michael exchanged a look, one of those married couple communications that happen without words. He shook his head slightly, but she ignored him. "You really don't know?" she asked, her voice dripping with disbelief. "No, I don't know." The frustration finally broke through, and my voice boomed across the quiet suburban street. "I don't know why my son won't let me in his house. I don't know why my grandchildren can't have the presents I made them. I don't know why the family I've loved and supported for 30 years suddenly treats me like a pariah." A neighbor across the street had come out to get their mail, and they were making no effort to hide their interest in our confrontation. Michael noticed too. "We can't do this here," he muttered. "Then let's do it inside," I said quickly. "Let's sit down like adults and figure this out." "No," Jessica's voice was ice. "You need to leave. Now. And don't come back." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually stepped backward, stumbling slightly on the porch steps. "Jessica, please." "Mom, who's outside?" Tommy's voice drifted through the screen door, and I saw a shadow pass by the window, tall for his age, probably trying to peek out to see what the commotion was about. My grandson was right there, 8 years old, probably wondering why raised voices were coming from his front porch. Did he even remember me? It had been 4 months since I'd seen him. "Nobody, sweetie," Jessica called back, never taking her eyes off me. "Just someone who was lost." Lost. That's exactly how I felt. Lost and confused and heartbroken in a way I hadn't experienced since Sarah died 3 years ago. "I'm not lost," I said quietly. "I'm exactly where I belong, with my family." "You're not welcome here anymore, Harold," Jessica said. "And if you keep showing up uninvited, I'll call the police." The police. She would call the police on me, on a grandfather who just wanted to hug his grandchildren. Michael put his hand on Jessica's arm, a gentle restraint. "Jess, that's enough." But she shrugged him off. "No, Michael, he needs to understand. This isn't going to be like before, where we just go along with it to keep the peace. Those children deserve better." "Better than what?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Better than a grandfather who loves them? Better than someone who's been part of their lives since the day they were born? Better than someone who..." She stopped herself, pressing her lips together like she was physically holding back words. "Someone who what?" I stepped forward. "What were you going to say?" She looked at Michael again, and this time he nodded, resignation written across his face. "Someone who can't be trusted around children," she finished, each word deliberate and devastating. The world seemed to tilt. The neat suburban street, the white picket fences, the sound of children playing in distant backyards. Everything became surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. "What did you just say to me?" "You heard me. I would never..." My voice caught. "I would never hurt those children. They're my grandchildren. I love them more than my own life." "Love doesn't excuse everything, Harold." I looked at Michael desperately. "Son, you know me. You know I would never hurt a child. Tell her she's wrong." But Michael wouldn't meet my eyes. He stood there, silent, letting his wife's accusation hang in the air like poison. "Oh God," I whispered, understanding finally dawning. "You believe her." Still, he said nothing. "Michael, look at me." My voice was stronger now, demanding. Look at your father and tell me you believe I would hurt those children." When he finally raised his eyes, I saw something that shattered me completely. Doubt. My own son. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike and throw a baseball, the man I'd stood beside at his wedding, doubted me. "I think you should go, Dad," he said quietly. I stood there for a long moment, looking at the two people who had just destroyed my world. Behind them, through the screen door, I could see the warm lights of a home where my grandchildren were probably setting the table for dinner, maybe wondering if Grandpa might call tonight like he sometimes did to say goodnight. "I'll go," I said finally, picking up my car keys with hands that shook. "But this isn't over. Those children are my family too." "Stay away from them," Michael said, and his voice was stronger now, more certain. "If you love them like you say you do, you'll stay away." I walked back to my rental car, each step feeling like I was walking through quicksand. As I reached for the door handle, I turned back one more time. "I don't know what lies you've been told about me," I called across the driveway, "but I'm going to find out the truth, and when I do, I'm coming back for my grandchildren." Jessica stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "Don't threaten us, Harold." "That's not a threat," I said, getting into the car. "That's a promise." As I drove away, I caught a glimpse in my rearview mirror of two small faces pressed against an upstairs window. Tommy and Emma, watching their grandfather disappear down the street, probably wondering why he'd come and gone without even saying hello. I drove aimlessly for 20 minutes before pulling into a McDonald's parking lot, my hands still trembling on the steering wheel. The smell of French fries and the sound of children laughing through the restaurant windows felt like salt in an open wound. Somewhere in there, kids were being normal kids, playing, giggling, being loved by their grandparents who probably took it all for granted. I pulled out my phone and stared at Michael's contact information. We'd exchanged maybe 50 calls over the past year, most of them brief and increasingly strained. When had that started? When had my son begun treating our conversations like obligations rather than connections? My finger hovered over his number, but what would I say? "Please explain why you think I'm dangerous around children." The very thought made my stomach turn. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found Margaret's name. My sister-in-law, Sarah's younger sister, lived about an hour south in Columbus. If anyone might have insight into what was happening with my family, it would be her. Sarah had always confided in Margaret, and after Sarah died, Margaret had become my closest link to family outside of Michael. "Harold?" Margaret's voice was surprised when she answered. "Everything all right? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." There was a pause. In the background, I could hear her TV playing. Some afternoon talk show with canned laughter. "What kind of something? Have you heard anything about me from Jessica or Michael? Anything that might explain why they wouldn't want me around the kids?" Another pause, longer this time. "Harold, where are you calling from?" "I'm in Dayton. I just tried to visit Michael and the kids and—" My voice caught. "Margaret, they wouldn't let me see them. Jessica said I couldn't be trusted around children." "Oh, honey." Her voice went soft, sympathetic. "Where are you right now?" "McDonald's parking lot, feeling like my world just ended." "Stay there, I'm coming to get you." "Margaret, you don't have to." "Harold James Morrison, you stay right where you are. I'll be there in 45 minutes. She hung up before I could protest. Margaret had always been like that, decisive, protective, especially after Sarah died. She'd appointed herself the keeper of family connections, the one who remembered birthdays and organized holiday gatherings. While I waited, I tried to piece together the last year of interactions with Michael's family. There had been Tommy's birthday party in March. I'd brought him a custom-built bike ramp that he'd been talking about for months. He'd hugged me, called me the best grandpa ever. Jessica had seemed normal, grateful even. She'd asked about my health, commented on how good the ramp looked. Easter had been different, though. I'd offered to host dinner at my house like I had the previous 2 years, but Jessica had insisted they needed to start their own traditions. Fair enough. Young families needed their independence. But when I'd asked if I could at least stop by for dessert, she'd said they were going to be too tired. Then there was Emma's birthday in June. I'd called to wish her happy birthday, and Michael had answered, but said Emma was napping at 3 in the afternoon. I'd offered to call back later, but he'd said they had plans all evening. I'd sent her present by mail, a music box I'd restored that played Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. I never heard if she'd received it. Margaret's ancient Honda Civic pulled into the parking lot, and she got out moving like a woman on a mission. At 68, she was still spry, still had that take-charge attitude that had made her such a good elementary school principal before she retired. "Get in," she said, opening my passenger door. "We're going to my house, and you're going to tell me everything." Her house was a small ranch-style place filled with photos. Sarah's wedding, family Christmas mornings, pictures of Tommy and Emma from when they were babies. Seeing those pictures felt like looking at evidence from a crime scene, proof that there had been happiness here, that I'd once been welcome in these moments. Margaret made coffee and sat across from me at her kitchen table. Start from the beginning. What exactly happened today? I told her everything, from the moment I'd pulled into Michael's driveway to Jessica's final threat about calling the police. Margaret listened without interrupting, her face growing more troubled with each detail. She said I couldn't be trusted around children, I finished. Margaret, what could that possibly mean? She was quiet for a long time, stirring her coffee even though she hadn't added anything to it. Margaret, there was something, she said finally. About 6 months ago, Jessica called me. My heart started beating faster. Called you about what? She was asking questions about you, about your relationship with Michael when he was growing up, about whether Sarah had ever mentioned concerns. Concerns about what? About how you were with children. The coffee mug slipped from my hands, clattering onto the saucer. What did you tell her? I told her the truth, that Sarah never said anything negative about you as a father, that you were devoted to Michael, maybe a little too strict sometimes, but never anything inappropriate. Margaret reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Harold, I told her she was barking up the wrong tree, but she kept pushing. She asked about Michael's teenage years, whether he'd ever seemed troubled, whether there were any periods where he'd acted out or seemed angry with you. I thought back to Michael's adolescence. Had there been difficult periods? Of course, what teenager didn't go through rough patches, but nothing that seemed unusual, nothing that couldn't be explained by normal growing pains. What else did she ask? She wanted to know if you'd ever been alone with other people's children, if Sarah had ever expressed concerns about leaving kids with you. The implication hit me like a physical blow. She thinks I molested someone. Margaret nodded grimly. That's what it sounds like. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that looked out on Margaret's small backyard. A swing set sat empty under an oak tree. She'd installed it years ago for when Tommy and Emma visited. This is insane, I said. I've never hurt a child in my life. I've never even thought about hurting a child. Where would she get an idea like that? I don't know, but Harold, you need to understand. If someone has convinced her that you're a threat to those children, she's going to fight like a mother bear to protect them. But it's not true. I know that. You know that. But what matters is what she believes. I turned back to face her. Did Michael call you after Jessica talked to you? No, and that surprised me. If Jessica was investigating you, I would have expected Michael to reach out, to ask me directly about his childhood. So either he already knew what she was looking for, or he told her not to contact you directly because he was handling it himself. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling between us like fog. I need to talk to him, I said finally. Man to man without Jessica there. I need to know what he really believes. That might be difficult. It sounds like they're presenting a united front. Then I'll wait. I'll find a way to get him alone. Margaret gave me a look I recognized from the many years I'd known her. Harold, what aren't you telling me? What do you mean? You're holding something back. I can see it in your face. I sat back down, suddenly feeling every one of my 72 years. There was something Michael said when he was a teenager, something I'd forgotten about until today. What kind of something? He was maybe 16, and we'd had a fight about his curfew. Typical father-son stuff, but he got so angry and he said, I took a shaky breath. He said I didn't know how to be a real father, that I was too controlling, too demanding. Harold, every teenager says things like that, but he also said something else. He said I made him feel like he was never good enough, like he was walking on eggshells around me. Margaret was quiet. I was strict, I continued. I expected a lot from him. What? Sarah used to say I was too hard on him sometimes, but I thought I was just preparing him for the real world. There's a big difference between being strict and being abusive. Is there? What if I crossed lines I didn't even know were there? Harold James Morrison, stop that right now. Margaret's voice was sharp. I knew you and Sarah for 30 years. I watched you with Michael when he was growing up. You were demanding, yes, you had high expectations, but you were never cruel, and you were certainly never inappropriate. Then why would Jessica think, I don't know, but we're going to find out? She stood up and walked to a small desk in the corner of the kitchen, pulling out a notebook and pen. What are you doing? Making a list. Everyone who might have information about what's going on. Jessica's sister, Michael's college friends, maybe some of his co-workers. Someone knows why she's suddenly afraid of you. You think someone told her something specific? I think someone planted a seed and it grew into something bigger. She looked up from her writing. The question is, was that seed based on truth or lies? I watched her write names I recognized and some I didn't. Margaret had always been thorough, methodical. If there were answers to be found, she would find them. What if, I said quietly, what if I did something I don't remember? What if I hurt him somehow and blocked it out? Margaret set down her pen and looked at me with the same expression she probably used with worried parents during her principal days. Harold, do you believe you're capable of hurting a child? No. Do you have any memory, however vague, of ever doing anything inappropriate with Michael or any other child? No. Then stop torturing yourself with what-ifs. She returned to her list. We're going to approach this systematically. We're going to find out what Jessica believes and why she believes it. And then we're going to get your grandchildren back. If this story is resonating with you so far, I'd love to know from which part of the world you're listening to this. Sometimes the pain of family separation is universal, no matter where we call home. Margaret insisted I stay the night at her place. I lay awake in her guest room, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around me. Every creak reminded me of the home Sarah and I had shared for 43 years, the house where Michael had grown up, where we'd celebrated birthdays and Christmas mornings, where I'd taught him to tie his shoes and helped him with homework at the kitchen table. By morning, Margaret had already made phone calls. I reached out to Linda Carson, she announced over breakfast, setting a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me. You remember her. She was Jessica's college roommate, stood up in their wedding. I picked at the eggs, my appetite still non-existent. What did she say? She's willing to meet with us this afternoon. She seemed cautious, like she knows something but isn't sure if she should share it. 2 hours later, we sat across from Linda in a coffee shop in downtown Columbus. She was a thin woman with nervous energy, constantly stirring her latte even though the foam had long since dissolved. I want you to know I think very highly of Michael, Linda began, which immediately put me on edge. He's a good man, a good father. I'm not here to criticize my son, I said. I just want to understand what's happening. Linda glanced around the coffee shop as if checking for eavesdroppers. Jessica's been different lately, more anxious, more protective of the kids. Different how? She joined this support group about 6 months ago for mothers dealing with family trauma. My heart sank. What kind of trauma? I don't know specifics. She's been very secretive about it, but she started asking questions about childhood memories, about how reliable they are, about whether children can repress traumatic experiences. Margaret leaned forward. Did she mention Harold specifically? Linda hesitated. She asked me once if I'd ever noticed anything odd about Michael's relationship with his father. If he'd ever seemed fearful or overly compliant around you. And what did you tell her? I told her the truth, that I'd only met you a handful of times, but you seemed like a normal grandfather, maybe a little formal, but not scary or inappropriate. She paused. But then she started showing me articles about generational abuse patterns, about how children of abuse often don't recognize it until they become parents themselves. The coffee shop suddenly felt too hot, too crowded. I loosened my collar and tried to keep my voice steady. Did she say Michael had remembered something? She said he'd been having dreams, disturbing dreams about his childhood, and that when she encouraged him to talk about them, he started remembering things that worried her. What kind of things? Linda looked genuinely uncomfortable now. Harold, I really think you should be having this conversation with Michael directly. I've tried, he won't talk to me. Then maybe you need to try harder. After Linda left, Margaret and I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, trying to process what we'd learned. Dreams, I said finally. She's basing this on dreams? And this support group, Margaret added. Harold, there are some therapy groups that can be suggestive. They plant ideas in people's heads about repressed memories. You think someone convinced Jessica that Michael was abused? I think someone convinced Jessica to convince Michael that he was abused. The next name on Margaret's list was Dr. Patricia Brennan, Michael's pediatrician when he was growing up. She was retired now, but had agreed to meet us at her old office, where she was helping transition her practice to a younger colleague. Dr. Brennan was exactly as I remembered her. No nonsense, direct, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She'd been the one to diagnose Michael's broken arm when he was 7, his pneumonia when he was 12, his concussion from football when he was 16. I heard through the grapevine that there was some family trouble, she said, settling into her old office chair. What can I do to help? I explained the situation as objectively as possible, watching her face for any sign of recognition or concern. Harold, she said when I finished, In 35 years of pediatric practice, I developed pretty good instincts about family dynamics. I saw real abuse cases, unfortunately more than I cared to count. And Michael was never one of them. He was a normal, healthy kid who clearly adored his father. A little anxious sometimes, maybe a perfectionist, but that's not uncommon in children of high-achieving parents. Jessica seems to think there were signs that were missed. Dr. Brennan pulled out a thick file folder. I brought Michael's medical records. With his permission, of course, I called and asked if I could share them with you to help resolve this situation. He gave permission. He did. Reluctantly, but yes. She opened the folder. Harold, I documented everything. Every visit, every injury, every concern. If I'd had even the slightest suspicion of abuse, it would be noted here. She spread the records across her desk. Years of checkups, vaccinations, sports physicals, sick visits. Her handwriting was neat, methodical. Look here, she said, pointing to an entry from when Michael was 9. He came in with a black eye from a baseball game. I asked him privately how it happened, asked if anyone at home had hurt him. His answer was immediate and natural. He told me about misjudging a fly ball. She flipped through more pages. Here, when he was 13, he had some behavioral issues at school. Fighting, talking back to teachers. I recommended counseling, and you and Sarah brought him in immediately. The counselor found no signs of abuse, just typical teenage acting out. What about the broken arm? Fell out of the treehouse you built in the backyard. Sarah was with him when it happened. The fracture pattern was completely consistent with his story. I stared at the medical records, a timeline of normal childhood injuries and illnesses, all properly treated, all well documented. Dr. Brennan, could someone develop false memories of abuse that never happened? It's possible, especially with suggestion from authority figures or group therapy situations. The mind is remarkably susceptible to implanted memories, particularly when there's emotional stress involved. What kind of emotional stress? Well, becoming a parent can trigger all sorts of anxieties about your own childhood. Michael's at an age where he's probably questioning every aspect of how he was raised, wondering if he's doing right by his own children. We left Dr. Brennan's office with copies of Michael's medical records and a signed statement that she had never observed any signs of abuse or neglect during his childhood. It should have felt like a victory, but instead, I felt hollow. He gave her permission to show us these records, I said to Margaret as we walked to the parking garage. What does that mean to you? It means part of him still trusts me. Part of him knows this doesn't make sense, or it means he's trying to find proof to support what he thinks he remembers. That evening, Margaret and I sat in her living room, surrounded by notes and documents. We'd talked to Linda, Dr. Brennan, and Michael's high school guidance counselor. Everyone who had known Michael as a child described him as normal, well-adjusted, close to his family. There's one more person we need to talk to, Margaret said finally. Who? Jessica's sister, Rachel. She's the one who referred Jessica to that support group. I felt a chill run down my spine. How do you know that? Linda mentioned it when we were leaving the coffee shop. She said Rachel had been through some kind of therapy for childhood issues and had recommended the same therapist to Jessica. You think Rachel planted these ideas in Jessica's head? I think Rachel might have projected her own experiences onto Jessica's situation. Margaret found Rachel's contact information and called her directly. I could only hear Margaret's side of the conversation, but her face grew increasingly troubled. She won't meet with us, Margaret said after hanging up. She says she doesn't want to interfere in family business. But she already has interfered, hasn't she? She did admit that she'd encouraged Jessica to question family dynamics. She said she was just trying to help Jessica protect her children the way she wishes someone had protected her. So Rachel was abused by her grandfather. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Rachel had been abused by her grandfather, and now she saw potential abuse in every family dynamic involving older men and children. We need to talk to Michael, I said. Tonight. I can't let this go on another day. Harold, he specifically told you to stay away. Then I'll wait outside his work. I'll follow him to the grocery store. I'll camp out in his driveway if I have to. I stood up, suddenly energized by purpose. My son is being manipulated by someone else's trauma, and my grandchildren are paying the price. What if you're wrong? What if he really does remember something? I thought about 8-year-old Michael teaching me to use his new computer, about 16-year-old Michael asking me to help him practice for his driver's test, about 25-year-old Michael asking me to walk Jessica down the aisle because her father couldn't be there. Then I'll face whatever I've done, I said, but I won't let false memories destroy my family. So I said, where are you watching this story from? I would love to know which city you are joining me from as Harold fights to save his relationship with his grandchildren. I arrived at Michael's office building at 7:30 a.m., knowing he typically started work by 8. The parking garage was mostly empty, and I positioned my rental car where I could see the entrance clearly. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, rehearsing what I would say when I saw him. At 7:52, Michael's blue Honda pulled into the garage. I watched him park 3 rows away, gather his briefcase and coffee cup, and head toward the elevator bank. He looked tired, older than his 34 years, with the posture of a man carrying a heavy burden. I got out of my car and walked quickly to intercept him. "Michael." He spun around, startled, and for a moment I saw fear in his eyes. Fear of me, his own father. "Dad, what are you doing here? I need to talk to you. Just the 2 of us." He glanced around the parking garage nervously. "I told you to stay away. 5 minutes, please, that's all I'm asking for. I'm going to be late for work. Then I'll wait here until you get off at 5. And if you use a different exit, I'll wait at your house. Michael, I'm not going away until we talk." Something in my voice must have convinced him I meant it, because he set down his briefcase and leaned against a concrete pillar. 5 minutes, he said. I took a deep breath, trying to organize the hundreds of things I wanted to say into something coherent. I know about the support group. I know about Rachel's influence on Jessica. I know about the dreams you've been having. His face went pale. Who told you about the dreams? It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're remembering things that never happened. How do you know they never happened? His voice was stronger now, defensive. How can you be so certain? Because I was there, Michael. I was your father. I know what kind of man I was, what kind of father I was. Do you? He stepped closer, and I could see the exhaustion in his face, the dark circles under his eyes. Because I'm remembering things, Dad. Things that make me question everything I thought I knew about my childhood. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. What kind of things? He looked around the parking garage again, as if worried someone might overhear us talking about family secrets. Inappropriate touching, he said quietly. Times when you said we were just playing games, but it felt wrong. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually stepped backward, gripping the side of a nearby car for support. Michael, I never... Bath time when I was too old for baths. You insisting on helping me get dressed when I could do it myself. Making me sit on your lap during movies even when it made me uncomfortable. Each accusation felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Son, those are normal things that fathers do with their children. There was never anything inappropriate about, was there? He was crying now, tears streaming down his face. Because I remember feeling scared sometimes. I remember not wanting to be alone with you. Michael, listen to me. I stepped forward carefully, like approaching a frightened animal. I need you to think about this logically. When did these memories start? What do you mean? Before Jessica joined that support group, did you have any memory of being abused? Any fear of me being around Tommy and Emma? He was quiet for a long moment, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. The dream started about 8 months ago, he admitted. After Jessica began questioning your childhood? She was trying to help me understand why I was having anxiety about parenting, why I sometimes felt overwhelmed when Tommy hugged me, or when Emma wanted to sit on my lap. And someone suggested that your anxiety might be related to repressed trauma. The therapist said that sometimes our bodies remember things our minds have blocked out. I felt a surge of anger, not at Michael, but at the people who had manipulated him into believing these false memories. Michael, do you remember learning to ride a bike? He looked confused by the change of subject. Of course. Do you remember how patient I was? How I ran alongside you for hours holding the back of the seat until you felt confident enough to ride on your own? Yeah. Do you remember when you broke your arm falling out of the treehouse? Yes. I carried you 3 blocks to the car because Mom was at the grocery store. I stayed with you in the emergency room all night. I helped you with everything. Eating, getting dressed, even scratching itches you couldn't reach. For 6 weeks. His face was softening slightly. Do you remember when you were 16 and got arrested for drinking beer in the park? A small smile crossed his face despite his tears. You were so angry. I was terrified. Terrified that you might make choices that would hurt your future. But do you remember what I said when we got home? You said, he paused, thinking. You said that mistakes don't define us, but how we learn from them does. And then what did we do? We talked, for like 3 hours, about peer pressure and making good choices, and he trailed off, his expression changing. Michael, does that sound like the behavior of an abusive father? A man who was hurting you? He was quiet for a long time, staring at the concrete floor of the parking garage. The therapist said that abusers can be very good at acting normal in some situations, while being inappropriate in others. What therapist? Who is this person who's convinced you I molested you? Dr. Sandra Wyatt. She specializes in recovered memory therapy. I'd never heard of her, but the term recovered memory therapy sent chills down my spine. I'd read articles about therapists who implanted false memories in vulnerable patients. Michael, I want you to do something for me. What? I want you to research Dr. Sandra Wyatt online. Look up recovered memory therapy. Read about false memory syndrome. Dad? And I want you to ask yourself one question. If I really abused you as a child, why didn't you remember it until someone else suggested it might have happened? Michael's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it. I have to go. I'm already late for a meeting. Please just think about what I've said and look up that information. He picked up his briefcase and started walking toward the elevators. Michael, I called after him. He turned back. I love you. I have always loved you, and I would rather die than hurt you or those grandchildren. He stood there for a moment, and I could see the internal battle playing out on his face. The son who had loved and trusted me for 30 years, fighting against the man who'd been convinced I was a monster. I'll think about it, he said finally, and then he was gone. I spent the rest of the day in Margaret's living room researching Dr. Sandra Wyatt and recovered memory therapy on her computer. What I found made my blood run cold. Dr. Wyatt had been involved in several lawsuits involving false memory implantation. Families had been destroyed by her techniques. Adult children had accused their parents of abuse based on memories recovered during her sessions, only to recant years later when they realized the memories were false. There were testimonials from people who had been her patients, describing how she had convinced them they were abuse victims when they had no initial memory of trauma. The techniques she used, hypnosis, guided imagery, dream interpretation, were known to be highly suggestive and prone to creating false memories. This woman is a predator, I told Margaret, showing her the articles on the screen. She destroys families for a living. Can we use this information to convince Michael? I'm going to try. That evening, I printed out everything I'd found about Dr. Wyatt and put it in a manila envelope. I drove to Michael's house, knowing Jessica would probably call the police if she saw me, but hoping I could leave the information where Michael would find it. As I pulled up to the house, I saw Jessica's car wasn't in the driveway. Michael's Honda was there, along with an unfamiliar sedan. Through the living room window, I could see Michael talking to a woman I didn't recognize, middle-aged, professionally dressed, with a briefcase open on the coffee table. Dr. Sandra Wyatt. She was in my son's house, probably conducting another therapy session, implanting more false memories, poisoning him further against me. I sat in my car, envelope in hand, watching this woman destroy my family in real time. Every minute she spent with Michael was another minute of manipulation, another layer of false memories being built. I had to do something. I got out of the car and walked up to the front door. Through the window, I could see them sitting across from each other, Dr. Wyatt taking notes while Michael talked. His body language was tense, distressed. I knocked on the door. The conversation inside stopped immediately. I could see Michael's head turn toward the front door, then Dr. Wyatt standing up and moving out of my line of sight. Michael opened the door, but only a crack, keeping the chain lock engaged. Dad, you can't be here. I know who that woman is, I said, loud enough for Dr. Wyatt to hear. I know what she's doing to you. You need to leave. Now. Michael, that woman has been sued multiple times for implanting false memories. She's destroyed dozens of families with her techniques. Stop it. I have documentation, articles, court records, testimonials from her former patients who realized she'd convinced them of things that never happened. I held up the manila envelope, pressing it against the crack in the door. Just read this, please. Behind Michael, I could see Dr. Wyatt approaching the door. Mr. Morrison, she said, her voice calm and professional. You're disrupting a therapy session. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. And I'm going to ask you to stop poisoning my son's mind with false memories. Her expression didn't change, but I caught something in her eyes, a flicker of recognition. She knew I'd found out about her methods. Michael, she said, still looking at me, would you like me to call the police? No, Michael said quietly. Dad, just give me the envelope and go. I slipped it through the crack in the door, and it fell to the floor at his feet. Read it, I said, and then ask yourself whether the memories you're recovering are real or planted. Michael closed the door without another word, and I walked back to my car, feeling like I'd just fired the opening shot in a war for my son's mind. 3 days passed without any word from Michael. I stayed at Margaret's house, jumping every time her phone rang, hoping it would be my son calling to say he'd read the information about Dr. Wyatt and realized he'd been manipulated. But the call never came. On Thursday morning, Margaret answered her phone, and I could tell immediately from her expression that something was wrong. "Harold," she said, hanging up. "That was Linda. Jessica's filed a restraining order against you." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. "What?" "She's claiming you're stalking the family, that you showed up at Michael's work and then at their house uninvited." I sank into Margaret's kitchen chair, feeling like the walls were closing in around me. "I was trying to save my son from that woman." "I know, but legally, you violated their request to stay away." "What does this mean?" Margaret sat across from me, her face grave. "It means you can't go within 500 feet of their house, Michael's workplace, or the children's school. If you do, you'll be arrested." The finality of it was devastating. Jessica had effectively cut me off from any possibility of contact with my family. There has to be something I can do. There is. We can contest the restraining order in court. "But Harold, that means this whole situation becomes public record. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Tommy and Emma, about how they would feel someday when they were old enough to understand that their grandfather had been accused of being a danger to children. "What choice do I have?" Margaret pulled out her phone. "I'm calling my nephew David. He's a family law attorney in Cincinnati. If anyone can help us navigate this, it's him." David Kellerman arrived at Margaret's house that afternoon, a sharp-dressed man in his 40s with the kind of confidence that came from years in courtrooms. He spread legal documents across Margaret's dining table and listened intently as I told him everything that had happened. "This is complicated," he said when I finished. "The restraining order itself is fairly standard. Jessica feels threatened, she has a right to protection, but the underlying issue of false memory implantation is much more complex. Can we prove that Dr. Wyatt is manipulating Michael? Potentially. I'll need to research her background thoroughly, gather expert testimony about false memory syndrome, maybe even get depositions from her former patients who've recanted their accusations. How long will that take? Months, maybe longer. Months. While my son continued to believe I'd abused him, while my grandchildren grew up thinking their grandfather was dangerous, while Dr. Wyatt continued her manipulation. What about the medical records, Dr. Brennan's statement? They're helpful, but they only prove there were no signs of abuse documented at the time. They don't disprove Michael's current memories. I felt like screaming. "So this woman can destroy families with no consequences?" I didn't say that, but we need to be strategic. David pulled out a yellow legal pad. "Tell me about Michael before all this started. Was he happy, successful, good relationship with his wife and children?" "As far as I knew, yes. He seemed like a devoted father, a good husband." "And when did his anxiety about parenting start?" Jessica mentioned it began around the time Emma was born. "Michael would sometimes seem overwhelmed when the kids wanted physical affection." David made notes. "That's actually important. New fathers often experience anxiety about appropriate boundaries with their children, especially if they've been exposed to media about child abuse. It's possible Dr. Wyatt took normal parental anxiety and convinced him it was evidence of repressed trauma. So how do we prove that?" "We need Michael to voluntarily seek evaluation from an independent therapist, someone who specializes in false memory cases. He won't do that. He believes Dr. Wyatt is helping him. Then we need to find another way to reach him." That evening, as I sat in Margaret's living room feeling utterly defeated, her phone rang again. This time she handed it to me. "It's for you." I took the phone hesitantly. "Hello? Harold?" The voice was unfamiliar. A woman, older, nervous. "Yes?" "This is Carol Brennan, Dr. Brennan's daughter, Patricia Brennan's daughter. I'd met her a few times when she was younger, though I couldn't picture her now. Carol, what can I do for you? I heard about what's happening with your family. Mom told me about your visit and..." She paused. "I need to tell you something. Something about Dr. Sandra Wyatt." My heart started racing. "What about her?" "She almost destroyed my marriage 5 years ago." I gripped the phone tighter. "What happened?" "I was having some anxiety after my second child was born, postpartum depression, though I didn't realize it at the time. A friend recommended Dr. Wyatt, said she specialized in helping women work through childhood issues that might be affecting their parenting. And, within 3 months, she had me convinced that my father had sexually abused me as a child. I had vivid, recovered memories of incidents that felt completely real." My hands were shaking. "But they weren't real?" "No. I confronted my parents, destroyed my relationship with them, filed a police report. My husband threatened to leave me if I didn't get a second opinion." What did the second therapist say? That Dr. Wyatt had used hypnosis and suggestive techniques to implant false memories. It took 2 years of therapy with a legitimate doctor to undo the damage she'd done to my mind. Carol, would you be willing to talk to Michael, to tell him what she did to you? I can't, I'm sorry, Harold, but I can't put myself through that again. But I can give you something else. What? I recorded some of my sessions with Dr. Wyatt. My husband insisted on it after he started getting suspicious about her methods. I nearly dropped the phone. You have recordings? Audio recordings of her using hypnosis to help me recover memories that never existed. And Harold, the techniques she used on me sound exactly like what she's probably using on Michael. Would you share those recordings? With your attorney, yes, but I want my name kept out of any legal proceedings. Of course, Carol, thank you. You might have just saved my family. After I hung up, I immediately called David Kellerman and told him about Carol's recordings. He was more excited than I'd heard him since we'd met. This could be exactly what we need, he said. Audio evidence of Dr. Wyatt's techniques could prove she's using the same methods on Michael. What's our next step? I'll get the recordings from Carol and have them analyzed by an expert in false memory research. If they show what I think they'll show, we can file a motion to have the restraining order modified to allow supervised visitation while we build our case. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope, but that hope was short-lived. The next morning, Margaret woke me with devastating news. Harold, you need to see this. She handed me her laptop, open to the local newspaper's website. The headline made my blood run cold. Local grandfather accused of child abuse seeks court battle. Below it was a photo of me, an old one from when I'd been featured in the paper for a community service project, alongside an article detailing Jessica's restraining order and the allegations against me. How did they get this information? Court records are public, Margaret said gently, but Harold, this is the least of our problems. What do you mean? She clicked to another tab on the browser. It was the website for Tommy's elementary school, with a message posted on their homepage. Dear parents, we want to make you aware that there has been a restraining order filed against an individual who may attempt to access our campus. Please be assured that we are taking all necessary precautions to ensure student safety. If you see anyone suspicious on or near school grounds, please contact the office immediately. My grandson's school was treating me like a predator. Parents who had known me for years, I'd helped build the playground equipment, donated materials for their science fair, now saw me as a threat to their children. It gets worse, Margaret said quietly, clicking to Facebook. Jessica had posted on her personal page, which was apparently public. The post read, "Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us. Thank you to everyone who has reached out with support as we protect our children from a dangerous situation. Please respect our privacy during this difficult time. Believe children, protect innocence." The post had dozens of comments, friends and acquaintances offering support, expressing outrage at an unnamed predator, promising to keep their own children safe from people like me. My reputation, built over 72 years of living in this community, was destroyed. "I can't fight this," I said, closing the laptop. "Even if we prove I'm innocent, people will always wonder. Tommy and Emma will grow up hearing whispers about their grandfather." "Harold James Morrison, don't you dare give up." Margaret's voice was fierce. "Those children need you. And somewhere deep down, Michael needs you too. Look at what this is doing to everyone. Maybe it would be better if I just disappeared." "Is that what Sarah would want? For you to abandon her son and grandchildren when they need you most?" I thought about Sarah, about her unwavering belief in fighting for family no matter how difficult the battle. "What would she do?" I asked. "She'd fight like hell," Margaret said, "and she'd never forgive either of us if we let that woman win. If you have ever lived something similar to this, fighting for your family against false accusations, leave me a comment telling me from which country you are listening to me. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these struggles makes all the difference." 2 weeks later, I sat in a courthouse conference room across from Michael and Jessica, with David Kellerman beside me and their attorney at the other end of the table. The judge had ordered mediation before our court hearing, one last attempt to resolve the restraining order dispute without a full trial. Michael looked terrible, thinner than I'd ever seen him, dark circles under his eyes, his hands shaking slightly as he signed paperwork. Jessica sat rigidly beside him, her jaw set in determination, but I noticed she wouldn't make eye contact with me. "Before we begin," David said, "I'd like to present some evidence that's relevant to this case." He placed a small digital recorder on the table. "This is an audio recording of Dr. Sandra Wyatt conducting therapy sessions with another patient, A woman who was convinced she had repressed memories of childhood abuse, memories that were later proven to be false. Jessica's attorney objected immediately. That recording violates doctor-patient confidentiality. The patient gave written permission for its use in this proceeding, David replied, producing a signed document. She specifically wanted to prevent Dr. Wyatt from destroying another family the way she almost destroyed hers. The mediator, an older woman with kind eyes, nodded for David to proceed. What we heard over the next 20 minutes was chilling. Dr. Wyatt's voice, calm and authoritative, leading Carol Brennan through guided visualization exercises that were clearly designed to implant false memories. "Let your mind drift back to when you were 6 years old," Dr. Wyatt's recorded voice said. "You're feeling anxious, unsafe. Someone is making you uncomfortable. Can you see who it is?" "I'm not sure." "Don't think with your conscious mind. Let your body remember. Your father is there, isn't he? He's doing something that makes you feel bad." "Maybe. I think so." "Trust your instincts. What is he doing to you?" By the end of the recording, Carol was sobbing, describing vivid memories of abuse that she later discovered had never happened. When the recording stopped, the conference room was silent. Michael's face had gone completely white. "This is the same woman who's been treating your husband," David said to Jessica, "using the same techniques we just heard." "That doesn't prove anything," Jessica's attorney said, but his voice lacked conviction. "It proves Dr. Wyatt has a pattern of implanting false memories in vulnerable patients," David replied. "And we have more evidence." He placed a thick folder on the table. Depositions from 6 of Dr. Wyatt's former patients, all of whom made false accusations against family members based on recovered memories from her sessions, 5 lawsuits against her for malpractice, and a psychiatric evaluation of her methods by Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, the leading expert on false memory syndrome. Michael spoke for the first time since we'd entered the room. "Dad." His voice was barely a whisper. I looked at my son, seeing past the man who had accused me to the frightened little boy who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. "Yes, Michael? I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Always. Did you ever hurt me, in any way?" "No." I met his eyes directly. "I never hurt you, Michael. I was strict sometimes, maybe too strict. I expected a lot from you, but I never, ever touched you inappropriately or made you feel unsafe." Tears were streaming down his face now. "But the memories feel so real." "I know they do, son. That's what makes this so insidious." David opened the folder and pulled out a scientific article. "Michael, this study shows that false memories created through suggestive therapy techniques can feel just as real as genuine memories. Your brain can't tell the difference between something that actually happened and something that was vividly imagined during hypnosis." "But why would she do this?" Michael asked, looking lost. "Because she genuinely believes she's helping people," David explained. "Dr. Wyatt subscribes to a discredited theory that all psychological problems stem from repressed childhood trauma. She's convinced herself that she's uncovering hidden abuse, when in reality she's creating false memories." Jessica finally spoke. "What about the anxiety Michael feels around the children?" "That's real." "Absolutely," David agreed. "New parent anxiety is extremely common, especially for fathers who worry about maintaining appropriate boundaries with their children. Dr. Wyatt took that normal anxiety and convinced Michael it was evidence of being abused." The mediator leaned forward. "Michael, I have to ask, before you started seeing Dr. Wyatt, did you have any memory of being abused by your father?" Michael was quiet for a long time. "No," he finally admitted. "The memories only started after I began therapy with her. And before that, how was your relationship with your father?" "Good, he was a good dad." Michael looked at me with something approaching his old warmth. "Demanding, yes. He wanted me to excel at everything, but I never felt unsafe with him." Jessica was crying now too. "But Rachel said—" "Rachel was genuinely abused by her grandfather," I said gently. "And she's projecting her trauma onto our family because she wants to protect you and the children. But her good intentions don't make her suspicions true." The mediator turned to Jessica. "Mrs. Morrison, based on what you've heard today, are you willing to consider that your husband may have been influenced to develop false memories?" Jessica looked between Michael and me, her resolve clearly cracking. "I just wanted to protect my children. That's what every good mother wants," I said. "But Jessica, I'm not a threat to Tommy and Emma. I'm their grandfather who loves them desperately." "What happens now?" Michael asked. David answered. "First, you need to stop seeing Dr. Wyatt immediately. Then you should work with a therapist who specializes in false memory recovery, someone who can help you separate the implanted memories from your real experiences." And the restraining order? The mediator looked at all parties. Given the evidence presented today, I'm recommending that the restraining order be modified to allow supervised visits while Mr. Michael Morrison receives appropriate therapy. Jessica's attorney started to object, but Jessica held up her hand to stop him. No, she said quietly. If this is all false, then I've kept the children from their grandfather for no reason. Jessica, I said carefully, I don't blame you for protecting your children. That's what parents should do when they believe there's a threat. But I may have been wrong. You acted on the best information you had at the time. 6 months later, I sat in Tommy's bedroom reading him a bedtime story, while Emma played with the dollhouse I'd finally been able to give her. Michael was downstairs in the kitchen, talking with Margaret about his progress in therapy with Dr. Richard Chen, a specialist in false memory recovery. The road back hadn't been easy. Michael had to work through months of confusion as Dr. Chen helped him separate the false memories from reality. There were setbacks, days when the implanted memories felt more real than his actual childhood experiences. Jessica had been seeing her own therapist to deal with the guilt of having believed false accusations. She'd cut contact with Rachel, who refused to accept that she'd been wrong about me. The community healing had been slower. Some neighbors still crossed the street when they saw me. Parents at Tommy's school still watched me with suspicion, but gradually, as the truth came out, most people realized they'd been quick to judge. "Grandpa," Emma said, looking up from her dollhouse, "will you show me how to fix the tiny door again?" "Of course, sweetheart." As I knelt beside her on the floor, adjusting the miniature hinges I'd crafted with such care, I thought about how close I'd come to losing all of this forever. If not for Margaret's determination, David's legal expertise, and Carol Brennan's courage in sharing her recordings, I might never have held my grandchildren again. "Grandpa," Tommy called from his bed. "Yes, buddy. I'm glad you're back." "Me too, Tommy, me too." Michael appeared in the doorway watching us with a smile I hadn't seen in over a year. The therapy was working. Day by day, he was reclaiming his real memories, remembering the father who had taught him to be strong and kind and determined. "Dad," he said, "when you're done with story time, would you like to stay for coffee? I wanted to show you some pictures I found from when I was a kid." "I'd like that very much." As I tucked Tommy into bed and kissed Emma goodnight, I thought about all the other families out there who might be going through what we'd experienced. False memories, manipulative therapists, good people turned against each other by lies that felt like truth. "Sweet dreams," I whispered to my grandchildren, and for the first time in almost a year I knew they would be. The truth had set us free, but it had taken everything we had to fight for it. Some battles are worth every ounce of strength you possess, and the love of family is always one of them, wherever you are in the world. If this story has touched your heart or reminded you of the importance of fighting for truth and family, know that love and persistence can overcome even the most devastating lies. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones most worth winning.